Right. Oh, mate. What happened? Okay. We're up to 6-7 lines from the bottom. Probably this next daf is one of the most foundational daf in the whole idea of how to deal with the Yetzer Hara. It's a shame that we have to. Okay, we'll see how much we can get. But Motzi Yom Tov v'chulu. Motzi Yom Tov Sukkos, they would go down to the Zasnoshim and they would fix something up. My Tikkun Goda, what exactly did they do? Originally, the walls of the Zasnoshim were smooth. They surrounded it with wooden planks. That the women would stand on top and the men below. So this is what the Tikkun Goda was. So what happened was they made wooden slats come out from the walls of the Zasnoshim. It's interesting. Each time, this one has a picture, the other one doesn't, etc. It's also hard to picture. What they did was that wooden boards coming out, and they would make the women stand on top and the men below. The very beginning, the women were inside, the men were outside. It means the women were inside the Ezras Yisrael, and the men were on the Har Bayis to watch the Sukkot Hashem. It would come to Kalus Rosh, and especially because for the men to be able to see, they'd have to go look through the women. So someone explains that women are always going to be less priestestic when they're looking through men and men through women. So therefore made the woman on the outside and men on the inside. But this still came to behavior which was not correct. The woman stood on top and the men below. How could they do that? A special rule that everything in the Beis Hamikdash was built according to the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu told David HaMelech. So if that's the case, how can you make a change? They found the pasuk which they dashed on top of them based on the Dalef. This pasuk describes when Mashiach will come, Zechariah, and it's the end of battle Gog and Magog. The pasuk says a very strange pasuk. The entire land will mourn. Mishpochis levad, each family alone. Mishpachas Beis David levad, the family of Beis David levad, and the Sheim levad, and the wives separate. So we see that this great mourning which will happen when Mashiach comes, will describe why there'll be mourning. What will happen is there will be a division between the men and the women. They'll say as follows: it's one kal v'chimah, it's not kal v'chimah. My law said love. Shasukid the hesped. When a person's mourning, he's less connected, is less close to behaving in an appropriate manner. By then, once Mashiach comes, the Yisrael will be weakened. Nevertheless, men and women should be separate. Now they're busy with joy, which creates a much more chance, which is close to Kalus Rosh. When we do have Yetzer, how much more so that we have to be careful to make a separation between men and women. What exactly will be mourning? That there will be two Mashiachs, one will be killed, and that is what will be mourning, the death of Mashiach. There's a famous Ramchal that says that this decree that Mashiach ben Yosef will be killed has been annulled over the years, and it's not going to happen anymore. But originally that was the plan, that there will be two Mashiachs and one will be killed. That what will happen is when Mashiach comes, Hashem will kill the Yetzer Hara. It says, well, they'll look at the one that's been stabbed. The soft to Olav. They'll mourn over him like a mourning over a single son, like a person would mourn over an only child, which is a terrible, terrible mourning. First, Hashem would lose their only child, they would be in devastation. So that was the reason the Apostle describes the mourning in such strong terms. It's because we're describing the death of Mashiach ben Yosef. If we're describing the Yisrael as being killed, why is mourning? They should be rejoiceful that the Yisrael is gone. And my Mashiach comes, Hashem will bring the Yisrael v'shoichte and slaughter it b'fnei tzadikim b'fnei Roshoim. Tzadikim nit menem kahal kivoya. the tzaddikim, the Yetzirah look like a huge high mountain, which is very difficult to overcome. To the wicked, it will look like a thin string. And both sets will cry. How were we able to conquer such a high mountain? How were we not able to conquer this thin string? So the Gemara is explaining that what will happen is this morning, this crying will be when Mashiach comes because the Yetzirah have been slaughtered. Mashor adds that the part of the crying will be that once Mashiach comes, we will not get as rewarded for the mitzvahs, because after all, the challenge will be less. Since the challenge is less, so the reward will be less. Oh, the tzaddikim were crying tears.
Yeah, that's not Hesed. The
way Rashi explains, Rashi says they remembered the pain, the struggle they went through the whole lives, constantly overcoming the Yetzirah, and that is the cry, like a bitter cry. This question is, why would the tzaddikim see that Yetzirah as a very, very big mountain, difficult to overcome on the Rishon like a thin string? Is one which all the Bali must discuss. I'll just say a couple of ideas. The Sfas Emes writes that a Rasha, the first moment he gets a temptation, he immediately gives in. A tzaddik doesn't. So what happens is, since a Rasha gives in the first temptation, the Yetzirah never needs to get strong. As a small temptation, he gives in. Another small temptation gives in. So the Yetzirah remains like a thin string, like we'll see later. It's a thin string. And the person, he doesn't overcome it. But the tzaddik, since he fights the Yetzirah every time, and therefore what happens is, the Yetzirah has to get stronger, because as a person grows, the Yetzirah gets stronger. So eventually, indeed, the Yetzirah will be like a very, very tall mountain, because it is a huge thing to overcome. Yeah, that's the Tanya talks about right at the beginning. That's a different idea. Okay, this is not what the Gemara is discussing. Are you quoting from the Tanya a little bit? That's right. Again, that's the first part to discuss. But we'll discuss. That's another point. That's the tzaddik could be sheikhed. Another. The Marshal says that, again, the Dessler writes that all Yetzirah is Dimion. Dimion is something which you imagine. The person imagines that if he would only have that event, do that thing, he would be happy. So what happens is, a Rosh has experienced it and seen that hasn't made him happy. So therefore, for him, he realizes the Yetzirah was just a little thing. It was very easy to overcome. But a tzaddik who's never overcome it, he imagines that the pleasures of the Yetzirah are very, 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 very big. It's a bit like the Moishe once said, that a child of Leibach who's never experienced what it's like to live a life of partying thinks to himself that all the people that he sees, that he ever hears about, that appear on television, are all blissfully happy. He says, but I have been there, done that, and I see that there's not much to it, therefore it is. And I'm sure adds one small point, is I said, the more later tells us the Yetzirah gets stronger and stronger as you give in. So therefore the tzaddikim, they see the future. And they realize if they give in, the more will happen is they'll ask for more and more and more. So they see it as a very big mountain, because they realize that it's not something which is just given and get. They'll show you, look at the Yetzirah this morning. The Yetzirah asks them to do this one, this one, that there. There's a lot of depth into this idea that when Mashiach comes, we will see the Yetzirah in a different fashion. Okay. But I can be surprised with them. In my eyes, it's also wondrous that they were able to conquer the Yetzirah. In the beginning, the Yetzirah is like the string of a spider. The string of a spider is very, very easy to snap. But eventually, if a person gives in, it becomes like ropes of a cart, of a wagon. That means this is a little bit to do like concept of it's an addiction. A person gets used to something, and he gets more and more every time he does it. Then if they say the brain neurons actually become stronger and stronger, gets attached to that line of behavior. So what happens is, in the beginning you give in, you could stop yourself. If a person does it again and again and again, it finds it very, very hard to stop himself. Those who draw sin, the Chevle Hashav. Chevle Hashav means ropes of nothing. That's referring to a spider's web, which is literally a rope which is almost nothing. It's nothing. But then it becomes like the ropes of a wagon, the further sins.
You said recently, if someone does not do it 3 times or something.
That's right. That's exactly the same idea. Yes, you're right. Ask for me something now. Give it to you. What happens is that when Hashem brings Mashiach, he'll ask him anything you want, I'll give it to you. He sees the previous Mashiach being killed. All I want is I should live. To live, actually, before you even ask, you've already given it to him. And what happened was Hashem has already promised life from Mashiach and the David HaMelech davened that his descendants should live. The Yitzhak has 7 different names. That means there's 7 different facets to the Yitzhak. It's evil from its youth. Moishe called it Oren meaning a blockage. The blockage of your heart. David called it Tomei, he called it impure. The fact that he says that he created for me a pure heart is a right that it was impure when he did that verse. Shlomo called his son an enemy. If your enemy is hungry, and that's referring to the Yitzhak, achileu lechem. Give him bread. If he's thirsty, ashkiyu mayim, because you're pouring coals over his head. Hashem yishalem locha, not that he'll pay you, he'll complete it over into your hands. The word lechem over here is referring to a different pasuk that the Torah says, "Who called someone lechula mayim." Anybody who's struggling can go and get water and bread. Water and bread is a reference to Torah, because water and bread nourish a body, so too Torah nourishes the soul. And we're saying that if your enemy is hungry, so give him bread. If he's thirsty, give him water. We're referring to Torah, which is like water and bread. The Chovos writes, a famous Chovos, that you have to be aware that your worst enemy is sitting between your ribs, and he doesn't leave you for a moment. And every time you are asleep, he's still awake. You switch off him, he never switches off you. You vanquish him once, twice, 3 times, and he still carries on. And he describes the fact is that the person has to be aware that within him he has a force which is trying to self-destruct. That means smoothing out the path. Remove the stumbling block from the way of my nation. I'll take away your stone heart and give you a heart of flesh. You're called him the hidden one. The hidden one I will remove from you. Each one is can understand has different aspect. I want to say that Melech Orach told me that he was very, 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 very close to Slucha Vasna. And this pasuk that we say Vasvesis Deva Evan is we say it in after Parshas Paul. A couple of weeks before Pesach we have a Parshas Paul, and it's in the perek of that. So Slucha Vasna used to cry every time he read this pasuk. And Melech Orach once said to him, "Why? What disturbs you so much about this pasuk?" So he said the ancient thing, and Melech Orach really liked it. He said that the pasuk is telling us that till Mashiach comes, we'll have a stone heart, and then when Mashiach comes, we'll have a heart made out of flesh. So the idea being that nowadays there are so many tragedies and so many things going wrong. For a person to remain sane and for a person to continue serving Hashem, he has to develop a heart which is unaffected by tragedy and not to over-empathize with different troubles that people are having. Because if you did, you hear 2 children were knocked over in Antwerp. A person can become broken from such terrible thoughts. So he said, in this world, you have to have a stone heart. It's the only way to survive. But the davening that Mashiach comes, then what will happen is, what's the problem with the stone heart? Is that you're not able to feel other things either, good things as well. But Mashiach comes, then Hakadosh Baruch Hu will be able to take away that heart and give us a normal, healthy heart. It's hidden in the heart of a person. I'll push him away to an empty, desolate land, in a place where there's nobody able to attack with him. As pon of his face, Yom HaKadmoni. Yom HaKadmoni means the first sea. It's another way of translating it. Yom is a sea, Kadmoni. What's the first sea? The first sea is the first base of Mikdash. Why? Because just like a sea, all the rivers flow to the sea. It's a place where everything gathers. So too the Beis Hamikdash was a place where everybody gathered. And the Kadmoni meaning the first Beis Hamikdash. Nema, Shenosan Ein Hamikdash Shavishim, the Chriva, someone should destroy the first Beis Hamikdash. And he killed the Talmidei Chachamim that were there. And then, eventually his end was to the latter sea. That's referring to the second Beis Hamikdash. Shenosan Ein Hamikdash Sheni, the Chriva, he killed the Talmidei Chachamim. And he created a particularly bad smell. Moishe is bitterness, tzachanosa is bad smell, is stink. They saw attacks dafka yid are not going. That means a yid has a more of a yitzhar than a goy. What does it mean that he did something great, means something terrible? They attacked him with more than anybody else. Unfortunately, I mentioned once before, I've got a close relative who told me that he left the derech, and he said to me that while he was keeping Torah mitzvahs, his yitzhar was very, very strong. But once he moved out to different societies, it's a different world. The yitzhar leaves you alone. The Apostle said, that's just what the world tells us. He heard this person to come out, so he said to this woman, let's go early and go on a certain path. But the problem is yichud. You can't go on a journey together without anybody else. He said, I'll go after them to make sure they don't do an issa. Also, he went behind the 3 parsa. 3 parsa is 12 mil, approximately 12 kilometers. The Agma in the meadow, which was empty of people, when they were separated from each other at the end of the path, we heard them. We've got a distant journey, meaning that our journey splits and we're distant from each other. With Savs and Basima, and I enjoyed your company. Basima means sweet. Our company is sweet. Omar Abai, man, the sonily, with my enemy, meaning himself, because they want to speak about him negatively. Have if it would have been my enemy, I would have definitely been done a nichshel in Aveira. Means Abai said if it would have been me going to be yichud with another woman, 3 parts, I would definitely been done in Aveira. Also, told nafshi people to dash from its time. He became depressed, and he leaned on the bolt of a door like somebody who is in a very, very low state. He leans on a low thing and he gets himself all unhappy. Also, Saba, that elderly person came, which Tesis and Chunin tells us, was probably Eliyahu Navi. He says not definitely Eliyahu Navi, but says most times it was Eliyahu Navi. Anybody who's greater has a bigger yitzhar. Ask Chaim Shulevitz. I don't understand. If it's greater and his yitzhar is bigger, so then he's back to square one to the other people that weren't nichshon. Why was Abai so sure that he would do the aver? These people had a lower yitzhar and a lower greatness, and they didn't do the aver. He's greater, he has a bigger yitzhar, so why would he have done the aver? So Chaim Shulevitz from here, it doesn't go equal. The Talmid Chacham goes like this, the yitzhar goes much, 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 much higher. That means it's not just that the yitzhar is bigger if a person's greater, but in fact it goes compounded bigger. It's much, much, much bigger. Exponentially bigger. That's a better word. And the reason is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants them to get more schar, it makes the challenge much, much, much bigger. The yitzhar gets stronger every day. Tries to kill him. And he tries to kill him, but Hashem won't save him. Hashem saves the person if he tries his best. Hashem saves the yitzhar. One more thing, we'll finish. In if this yitzhar was a manuva is a disgrace, abomination, meets you. If it's a stone in Moach or melt in Balsam, or crack. Just like water can break stones. If you've got a stream of water, it makes grooves in the stone. In Balsam is like a stone, like a hammer breaks a rock. I once heard this from Chaim Kafan, and he made this so beautifully that it struck me. He asked a strong question. Anybody got a strong question in this Gemara? What?
You don't normally melt stone or...
much more fundamental. Okay. The Gemara Amud Aleph says the Yitzhar has how many names? 7. And he lists them all out. None of them was the word menuva. Says you turn the page. Says Rashi, who's the menuva? Says Rashi, top line, Yitzhar. If the Yitzhar is called menuva, why pick up another name? Why not say it's got 8 names? Yes, but why did he call him menuva? Why didn't he choose one of the 7 names? It is a strange thing. You have 7 names. So he said there's 2 kinds of yitzhars. There's the yitzhar which a person is born with, and that's 7 names, and that's something you have to challenge your whole life and you can't escape. There's another kind of yitzhar, that is a bad friend, a bad influence, etc. A what?
Bring on yourself.
Which one yourself? Saying if this horrible maneuver, this abomination meets you, then what should you do? Then you've got no choice. This is a different yitzhar. Go into Beis Medrash and then get away from him.
If he comes with you.
So he said that he won't do. That yitzhar won't. Okay, let's do it formalized. he makes a person do averos in this world, or made all of and he bears witness against him that he should deserve to go to Gehenna. Mefanik minoya avdo. It's very hard to translate. Mefanik is to indulge. Minoya from your youth, avdo your servant. Who's your servant? Is the Yetzer Hara. Because truthfully, your Yetzer Hara is your servant. Because if you really have the power to control him, says your slave. The word menoin came the word menoin actually means a leader, an officer. So eventually, when a person listens and indulges the Yetzer Hara will become like an officer, the leader. And the Gemara explains there's such thing called atbach. Atbach, many times it's got gematrias. One of the gematrias is you pair up all the letters that come to 10 or 100. So Aleph with Tes comes to 10, Beis with Ches, Gimel with Zayin, Daled with Vav, or Yud with Tzadi, Chof with Pei, because it comes to 100. That's the idea. So if you take the words atbach, you take the word menoin, it comes to word sada, which means a whip.